Hey everyone, I want to go over some tips and workflow on how to UV any piece of geometry. As a rule, you should typically always delete history and freeze your transforms on your geometry prior to beginning to UV. Now, to start this off, I'm going to go ahead and change the workspace up on the top right, and I'm going to change this to UV editing. This is going to split my viewport, with the left side being my perspective camera and the right side being the UV editor. Within the UV editor, you'll see a series of drop-down tabs at the top for all the tools, and over on the right, you'll see the UV toolkit, which gives you a more condensed version of the more common tools. Before I begin UVing, I'm going to go ahead and create a default cube and create a default cylinder. What I want you to think about whenever you're trying to unfold your geometry is think about these two different layouts. So what I'm going to do is drag this over to the left and put this one right here, just so you can see the two of them. With the cube, you'll notice every face is unfolded and flattened out and connected on a single edge, like so. And a cylinder has the top and bottom separated, with the body separated as one UV shell. So what we're going to do is try to figure out how to mimic those similar types of layouts with whatever geometry you're trying to unfold. To begin UVing, I'm going to start off with a 3-step process using a type of projection, followed by the cut and sew tool, and lastly an unfold tool. To begin, I'm going to go ahead and just pick a random piece of geometry and begin with my projection. I'm going to go ahead and dock this tool right here, like so. Now, to begin, I'm going to show a couple of tools that you should typically never use before showing the ones you should use. So starting off with automatic, if I click automatic, what it's going to do is it's going to project the UVs in 6 different directions, and it's just going to give you a ton of UV shells. For the most part, you should never use automatic unless in very specific circumstances. Next one down, I'm actually going to skip all the way down to planar and open up the dialog box. With the planar projection, you can project in either X, Y, Z, or camera. Notice how if I hit apply on X, it is projecting in this direction, as noted by this little square. If I select Y, it'll project in this Y direction. If I project with Z, there's the Z direction, and camera will project based on whatever camera you have. And notice it says camera here. There's also camera base right here, which does the same exact result. Now, I show you all these different ones to mainly say that it doesn't really matter which one you use once you begin unfolding. What I mean by that is, let's say I isolate this one piece of geometry. After you do your projection tool, what you want to do is cut an edge and then unfold the UVs. So what I'm going to do is select this bottom edge right down here. I'm going to come up to cut and sew and click cut. And now I'm going to grab all of the UVs and click modify and unfold. Now that was using the planar projection with a camera. Now if I decide to project in this X direction and then do the same exact thing where I grab this edge, I'm going to cut it, and then I'm going to grab the UVs and unfold it, I actually get the same exact result. So most of the time, it doesn't matter which ones you use. Now there are some underlying circumstances where it can matter. So let's say I grab a default cylinder really quick and I go to do a projection in the X, let's say. So what's going to happen is I'm going to try and cut off the top and bottom shell, just like how you remember with the default UVs. I'm going to drag the body over here, and right here I have the top of the UVs and here I have the bottom. If I go to try and unfold this, what it's going to do is it actually tries to unwrap it, but ends up just turning into a singular point and you can't see them anymore. A weird little hokey fix: if you decide to just pull an edge to where it's no longer a flat line, when you go to unfold it, that'll actually solve that problem. Now, the alternative to that is, instead of using the planar, you can just stick with a camera-based one. And as long as you project it and it's not in that perfectly flat perspective, you won't run into that issue. And remember, once you use an unfold, it really didn't matter how you initially made that projection. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that cylinder, and I'm just going to move back on to unwrapping some of these pieces. Now, some of these are going to be very quick and easy. This piece, for instance, since it is open and it is a pretty short cylinder, I'm actually just going to keep it as one UV shell. So if I just do a projection, I don't actually need to cut anything. I'll just do an unfold and I get this. Now, other pieces, this will give me 2 shells. If I grab this one, notice how I have one opening over here and I have one side over here. So you want to think of this one like the cylinder. I'm going to end up with a top and a body. Going to go ahead and do a planer. I'm going to choose the widest edge to be my seam right there. I'm going to cut this. I'm going to drag this aside just to see my 2 different shells. Now I can try to unfold this right away. This piece is going to work out great. However, this one has some distortion going on. And what I'm going to want to do is grab one more edge. In this case, I can grab the edge right here. Now notice there are 2 ways you can select. Either select in the perspective mode, or you can select edges in the UV editor. What's nice about selecting it in the UV editor, notice how when I click this edge right here, it's only grabbing the edge that's part of this shell. Whereas if I try to double click the edge over here, it actually wraps through the entire geometry, as you would anticipate. Now, if I did it this way, I wouldn't want to cut all these edges because that will create a bunch of extra seams. So I'm only going to click this one edge right here, click cut, and then click unfold. Now, moving on, if I return back to this one handle that I did previously, depending on the distortion that you're going for and how you want to texture it, this might actually be too much distortion on these corners. Now, you can check your distortion up at the top right here. And if you don't see these blue colors, by the way, you may have your settings set to this first button. Notice how this first one leaves everything gray. The next one over will give you a series of red and blue. So if I click this one really quick, notice how I have this red and blue. Typically you want everything to be blue. So if I come back over here to see a visual distortion, you can click the next one over called UV distortion. And what this is going to do, whatever is red is stretching and whatever blue is compressing. So it gives you a visual color on what needs to be unfolded. So I'm going to turn that off. Whenever you're trying to add additional seams, typically you want to add these edges on corners. So on this geometry, since this has a nice beveled corner, I'm going to go ahead and select the very center edge. With both of those selected, I'm going to click cut, and I'll just do these 2 pieces, or 3 pieces, should I say, individually. This first one, if I do an unfold, it should become perfectly straight. And these pieces, if I unfold, they compress a little bit more. Now, let's say I want to recombine these, but I want to try and keep this part straight. I'm going to grab both of these pieces. Now remember, the unfold, every time you unfold, it's just going to keep giving you the same exact result. So with this selected, if I keep running unfold, it's not actually doing anything. It is growing in size just a tiny bit, but the actual layout isn't changing whatsoever. Now to smoothen these UVs, you can use optimize to the right here. You can also find optimize under modify, and towards the bottom, you'll see optimize. And what optimize is doing is it's trying to smooth out your UVs. Now, what I'm doing right now is I'm just hitting G on the keyboard multiple times. G repeats your very last command. And now what I can do is come back over here. I can select all of these edges. Notice how I'm actually marqueing, selecting all of them. It doesn't matter that I select these inner edges. They're already connected, so it's not going to make a difference. And I'm going to come up to cut and sew, and I'm going to do stitch together. And it's just going to try and bring all this back in. I can try and run optimize one more time. Now notice how it did start to mess up my inside UVs. So I'm going to instead Control Z. Now you don't always have to run and unfold or optimize on the entire shell. You can just as easily do a selection on just the parts you want. So I can grab here, do an optimize, kind of like so. And I can even try and grab some of these if I go in a little bit more, maybe like that. And I'm going to run a straighten. So shift right click to straighten, and I'm going to try and straighten UVs. And maybe I'll try and optimize one more time, try to straighten one more time. Then I'll grab these outer ones and I'll just do an optimize one more time. Moving on, try out this body piece, going to isolate here. So remember back to the cylinder idea. This time I'll do a normal base projection. Normal base is going to just try and pick the largest sort of direction. But again, doesn't really matter which one of these you use. So it's giving me a UV shell. Going to select an edge and just cut it down the middle and unfold it. Now there is a good amount of distortion still kind of going on. You can see a slight hue of red throughout here. It gets a little bit more red on the top. So what I'm going to do is start separating this a little bit more. Since this is a smaller cylinder on the top, I'm going to go ahead and separate this. And again, I'm going to choose the corner. So in this case, the center edge right here, I'm going to cut that and I'm going to unfold. You can try and rotate this a little bit and try and optimize it. And I'm just running optimize a couple of times. Notice how it's actually straightening it out by every time I click G. And I can try using the straighten command by doing a straighten UV. Typically when I'm straightening, I do a straighten and optimize a couple of times just based on the results I get until I get something very smooth, kind of like so. Now from here, if I come back to this bottom piece, I'll just run an unfold to kind of see what I get. Since this top part right here is kind of a large flat face, I'll probably separate this one. So I'll grab this edge right there. And if I unfold it, it's actually going to return more back to its original shape. And what I'm going to do is I'll actually grab these edges right here and I'm going to shift right click and sew them together. And since I just ran that sew, I'm going to unfold it one more time just to get it as straight and smooth as possible. And just come back to this piece and unfold this now that I separated here. And I can try running optimize a bunch of times. Notice how it just keeps getting more straight. Now, depending on how you're UVing this, maybe this is good enough, or maybe you want to make it perfectly straight. For this case, I'm just going to leave it like so. Now, something a little bit more complicated, if I grab this part right here, think of this as the default cube where I'm going to want to separate all the individual faces. I'm going to click create. I'm just going to do a camera-based projection, and I'll start separating all these edges. I'm going to start off by trying to separate the top from the bottom. And I'm going to grab this corner. And I just need to make sure I have this edge loop wrapping all the way around. So I just need to keep clicking around the geometry. There we go. And I can cut that. Now on this particular piece, if I try to double click this and move it, notice how it's still attached. That is because I have this hole right over here and I need to separate this as well. So I'm going to grab that edge loop. And now if I try to move this, now I have two shells. I can try and unfold these two just as is and see what happens. So notice even though this is completely square, I am getting some kind of distortion going on right there. So what I want to do is start separating these corners. And you can either select them in the UV space or the 3D mode. In this instance, I feel like it is pretty simple to see it in the UVs. And again, I'm just selecting that center edge on all these corners. And I'll just do those four and just run an unfold just to see what it looks like. So notice how all that straightened up pretty nice. There's a little bit of distortion going on in here. This is these faces. So what I'll go ahead and do is actually separate these edges out. And I'll grab this, move it aside, and just to make it completely straight, I just need to grab a single edge, cut this, and unfold. And notice how that goes completely straight. Since I did remove it from here, just going to run unfold one more time and drag that over. Moving on to the other UV shell. I'm going to go ahead and grab these corners just like before. I'm going to cut these. And on this side, I think it might be easier to actually look at it in the 3D mode to figure out which are the correct corners I want to grab. So I'm going to grab this one right here, which is the same over here. I'm going to cut these. And by all means, you don't have to try and cut them all at once. You can slowly start cutting through all these until you figure out what is the correct edge loop. So I'm going to go ahead and separate this edge all the way around right here. Kind of like so. Cut that and run an unfold. That comes perfectly straight, and I'll run an unfold right there. And just like that, notice how all of these are pretty straightened out. Now, depending what you want, you could choose to combine some of these. So let's say I want to reduce the amount of shells right here. I could grab this piece right here and do a stitch together. Anytime you do this, you will want to run an unfold one more time, just to make sure everything's smooth back out. Something that actually looks a little bit more challenging, but really isn't, is this cord. Just like before, all I have to do, create, going to do a projection, and I just have to grab a single edge right here. I'm going to cut this and do an unfold. And notice what it gives me is one singular edge loop that runs all the way up and down. I'll go ahead and do one more piece on the gear, since the gear might look a little bit more challenging, starting off with a projection. Now, what I need to do is start selecting the edge loops. So again, gonna select this inner corner edge loop, and I'm just gonna grab all of these all the way around. And there is a bunch of them on the front and back that I want to make sure I grab. And here is the last one. Right, could cut that. And I'll just drag this aside to see what I have. Here are the inside faces that I can unfold, which gives me those shapes. From here, I want to grab a single edge. I'll just grab this middle corner one, and I'll just do it for every single piece. Kind of like so. Just going to cut this and then unfold, and then these should become completely straight lines. This piece right here, I still need to grab. Now, let's say you couldn't grab this edge loop perfectly. If I decide to click right here, notice how I'm not getting an edge loop, which would take a really long time if I decided to start clicking edge by edge. What I can do is, since this is a face loop, I can click one face right here, double click, which will give me this entire face. And then I can hit Shift greater than on the keyboard, which is going to expand the selection to get that entire outer piece. Lastly, I'm going to hold Control, right click, go to two edges, and then two edge perimeter. And that gives me the entire edge loop on both sides. Now I can cut this by clicking cut, and this should give me 3 new shelves. Right here is the entire back, which I should be able to click unfold. This is the entire outer gear, which I should select at least one edge loop. I'll go ahead and select that one and click cut, and if I unfold it, that'll give me one long edge loop. Now, depending on how you lay out your UVs, this might be too long, at which case I'm going to just select one more edge loop right there and cut it again. That way, when you lay it out, you can have 2 shorter ones instead of one really long one. And if need be, you can cut it a 4th time. All right, now off to the front of the gear. I'm gonna go ahead and choose this corner little edge to separate this cylinder from the rest of the gear. So I'll run an unfold right there, grab this piece, going to go ahead and separate this front face, which I can run an unfold. Lastly, I just need to find a singular edge loop running down the cylinder, do a cut and unfold. And if I want, I can even choose to straighten this out by running optimize a handful of times, followed by straighten. Then I'll just run optimize just a few more times. Sometimes you get a little unlucky with something like this where it doesn't want to cooperate, in which case I can just grab these, use the scale it into itself, and now I get completely straight UVs.